I was not prepared for what was about to happen. He said, this time we're going to all take turns reading. Instantly, I was like, oh no, I don't know how to read. I was a 12-year-old boy who did not know how to read. All right, everybody, welcome to the April 9th session of Sociological Communication 122. A course that was going to be a lot harder at the beginning of this semester, but as I have been caught up in all these other things, I have also backed off on you all a little bit. I've tried to make things a little bit easier, but at the same time, I still want you to get something out of it. And I think filling in the blanks of all of the stuff you've been fire hosed with in this class, retroversively, as we say, thank you, David, does require some engagement with your actual intellect, right? I can't just fire hose you with a bunch of stuff that you'll then retroactively fill in if you're not also engaging it with your own intellect, right? Your intellect is not your IQ. Your IQ is a made-up way of measuring your intellect, something that cannot be very well measured, right? Certain aspects of your intellect can be measured, and certain aspects of your intellect have been measured throughout your life. And that's part of the sort of ritual hazing process of the schooling system that confines you, like, in some cases, animals, right? Not like free animals, not like free roam animals, but like the kind of animals that are being abused in mass agriculture, right? So if you listen to the lecture I gave yesterday for Social 101, which is going to go up later today, and you don't have to listen to it, but if you do, I talk about that quite a lot. And I also talk about Columbine, the place of the first mass school shooting. And it's dark. It's a dark thing to talk about. I know it's something that keeps a lot of you up at night, or at least it kept you up at night when you're in high school. And rightfully so. It's a scary thing. But the reason I brought it up was because I was talking about people being forced for the majority of their most formative years to sit in boxes and not really get to move. And inside those boxes, being sat alongside kids that you're told that you're like these other kids because you're the same grade. And now what grade do you make within the grade that you're in? You might be a freshman, sophomore, junior, whatever you are, wherever you are, you belong to that subsection of your generation. And then how well you do or do not accomplish tasks set by authority figures in a way that meets their deadlines is supposed to dictate how you do for the rest of your life, right? That makes me sick to my stomach. I don't like it at all. I don't like it one bit. Nevertheless, we are here in a setting that is kind of like a continuation of high school now, right? The university, especially state universities, have become something like continued high school. Right. So I really wanted to kind of highlight where we are and what this is, and the fact that it makes me sick to my stomach, and the fact that a lot of you are probably starting to feel some butterflies as you approach the end of the semester. And I want to lend you a little bit of sympathy and comfort before I turn it into theory by just first of all saying it's not going to be that bad. There you go. That's the comfort. It's not going to be that bad. You don't have to write a 12-page paper. You're going to have an option of doing a little podcast episode, a little oral presentation. You'll get to, give a little talk, like 10-minute presentation with some Q&A. Or you can write something, but it doesn't have to be very long. And, it might be just like 5 pages. It's not a big deal. Of course, the length is not what matters. What matters is your heart in it? I'm not going to grade you on whether you did or did not use AI. I am going to grade you on whether you sound like AI. And at this point, most of you in your reflections sound like AI so much that I don't even know how to grade you. And that's either because you're using AI or because this schooling system that has abused you your entire life has reduced your intellect to something that is so boring and dull and plug and play, scripted, that you kind of just actually sound like AI. If that's actually your situation, now look, if you're using AI or whatever, okay, it's not going to go well for you in life, but whatever, rock on. I mean, there might be ways to use it. A couple of you have talked to me about ways of maybe using AI that are a little bit more sophisticated, where you're using it more as an editor and as an assistant than, having it actually write paragraph after paragraph after paragraph so that you can just get on to the next thing, right? But if you're in the other cluster of people, if you're actually trying to write something serious and it comes across like AI, that's a darker situation. Like, it's kind of darker because here you are, you're not cheating, but it sounds like you're cheating because your intellect has gone dull. You're scripted and it is actually either boring or like comes across like it was written by I don't know, like a focus group, the kind of focus group that, reviews Disney movies nowadays. Someone reviews those things, like, like all of these terrible Disney movies that are bringing those really classic cartoons into live action. And it's like, everyone's kind of irritated about it. Like, no one asked for this. And then you guys did a really bad job at it. Well, that focus group, the question is like, who's in the focus group? I'm not in the focus group. I would have said, veto this. This is terrible. Whoever they're paying to sit in their focus groups and then sitting there, reacting to the film before it eventually gets put into theaters is obviously not up to the task, right? But that's the thing. When the media is aimed at the lowest common denominator inside of you, inside of each and every one of us, the bar itself gets lowered and the art suffers, right? When we're talking about an intellect being dulled by a schooling system that stultifies us, which is to say, it slows us down and it forces us into living in a sort of just trying to get by, living somewhat passively, just thinking the same thoughts over and 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 over again as we just play out self-defeating habits. Art suffers, right? Intellect is not just about being really good at math. That's why I was just kind of trashing on IQ tests. It measures for problem-solving skills so that you can be a useful functionary for a corporation. That's what that is getting at, right? Just because someone like Einstein had a really high IQ doesn't mean that he would have graduated with a good grade in the schooling system today. In fact, he probably would have dropped out, right? Because if you want to save your life, if you want to live a life worth living, if you want to live a passion-driven life, if you want to someday raise a family with children who aren't just little consumer brats, but actually are passion-driven as well, right? It shouldn't be about IQ. It shouldn't be about grades. It should be about discovering what are your real interests And how do you honor those? And I'm saying that the media today, and the example I was just using is Disney, it's not targeting our best selves. Each and every one of you has a better self, right? Each and every one of you has a higher self, someone that you want to be, someone that you aspire to be, and someone that on some days you actually have been. Those kind of days where you go, I nailed it. That was awesome. I really was a person that day, and I did a good job, But then you also have a version of yourself that is not doing so well, right? You have this version of yourself that is, addicted. Addicted to scrolling on your phone, addicted to binging TV, addicted to gambling, addicted to sex, addicted to yada, 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 yada. But whatever it is, and every one of us has our thing, it's undermining our ability to be our better selves, right? And that might sound a little religious. And of course, every religion addresses this problem. But sociology and psychology both try to address this problem as well. Psychology usually operationalizes an attempt to address this problem through therapy, whereas sociology attempts to address this problem through what? Social work. Now, these are not the only applications of these fields. They're just the main careers that you can go into. And they are soul sucky careers. So there's a lot of people that are passionate about psychology or sociology who do not want to go into therapy or social work. And they don't want to go into it because they don't want to have to rip children away from their parents when they disagree with the state mandate to separate those children from their parents. Or it's soul crushing to constantly go into impoverished neighborhoods where there's domestic abuse and child neglect. Like, that's a hard job. No less hard than the therapist job of having to sit there and hear people talk about their traumas, right? Those are difficult jobs. And a lot of people end up leaving those jobs saying, I don't know if I was actually helping. And there's the government to blame. There's the market forces to blame. Different people of different political persuasions will blame either side or both. But then there's also the theoretical causes, or I guess we could say sometimes people will blame the bad theory. Bad theory is also responsible for a lot of bad action. And that includes every one of us insofar as we have certain patterns that we don't like. We might not think about those being the product of bad theory, but they are. They're the product of bad theory. The self-defeating patterns that we find ourselves in are the product of bad theory and of dulled intellects and of structurally stultified potentials. Okay, potential. Structural stultification. You've all heard me say it, I think, before, right? But just to reiterate, the idea is that we have capacities and talents and interests. And if we're not in an environment or institution that's able to nurture our interests, our talents, our capacities, and do so that we have the time, energy to cultivate those talents under mentors and tutors, people who will help us along the way as we pursue the things that we're inherently interested in or feel called to do, well, then we become sort of like broken, sad shadows of ourselves. And I feel like the little pep talk I want to give is a reminder that if you feel like that broken shadow of yourself, to remember that's not you. It's only part of you. And that you have a part of you that has higher capacities and inherent talents, and maybe even a calling that if you listen to it and honor it and pursue it with everything you've got, that could turn into a passion-driven life. Okay. I said that I was going to talk about the revolutionary subject and how that whole discourse from the old left and the new left influences the ways that we communicate. It influences the theories that we use to see the world that we forget are even theories. This is one of the first things critical theory will teach us, is that the way that we see the world, the way that feels natural to observe the world, when you're like, oh, well, that's just obvious, it's always the product of some theory. But it's usually a theory that you did not learn explicitly. So, for instance, the structure of your school growing up, the structure of your work week at the school, the structure of your family life, what has become normal in these institutions, that's the product of theory. Now, the teachers and the parents might be trying really hard to do something more and do something better than what the institution was set up to do. If the institution just wants to turn you into a worker bee who takes orders and never thinks, you'll still have parents and teachers who try to keep your mind open or try to keep you critical. But they also usually lacked the resources for really getting outside of their situation and being self-critical, right? Because they were too busy trying to survive, trying to keep their own head above water, right? And so I'm very empathetic to both the parents and the teachers. And it breaks my heart to see the ignorance and neglect that is perpetuated both in the home and the school. And remember, before you turn this next chapter and move on with your life after the university, your entire life was spent in these institutions, the family and the school. And to quote Pierre Bourdieu, the most important sociologist of the 20th century, hold on, what's my quote going to be? Says, well, I'm not going to quote him. I feel like I made it too complicated on myself there. Instead of quoting him, I'll just actually say what he says, okay? And that is that your life is molded by these institutions, that your habitus is something that comes to feel natural, but it is a product of the fields that you've had to navigate. Okay, so I'm going to pick on a few of you. Actually, I'll just pick on everybody in the chat. What are some fields that you have had to navigate in your life? Now, it's okay to guess. It doesn't have to be correct. But also, when we're thinking about Bourdieu and we're thinking about fields, anywhere that there are human beings and you are in relation to them and there is respect or honor or prestige that can be won or lost, you're in a field. Go ahead and say in the chat. A field that you had to navigate before you got to Boise State. To repeat the definition of field, anywhere that there is respect, honor, prestige, or recognition to be won or lost. We got soccer team. We got wrestling team. Ooh, that's a good one. School playground. Sports teams. Finding a job. The job market is a field. Friendships could be a field. Now, it's kind of sad in a sort of sense that friendships are a field but it's also, I think, kind of true, right? Because we make friends as we try to survive within fields. High school in general would count. High school in general would count. You could kind of think, how many of you are familiar with set theory in mathematics? No? Okay. A little bit. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay, well, it's like you have a set, and then there's sets inside of the set, and then there's sets inside of those sets, right? All the different sets have sets inside of them, right? It's a whole approach, a whole way of looking at things. And it applies to what we're talking about with socioanalysis. And you can't talk about socioanalysis without thinking about fields. And so, yeah, you could think about the field of the global economy, and then you could think about the field of the United States, and you could think about the field of politics versus economics in the United States. And then you could think about the field of the schooling system within relation to those other fields. Now, all of the fields, or at least I think definitionally, all of the fields are in relation to other fields. So, for instance, achieving status in the soccer team is not just the soccer team there at your school. It's also the world of soccer, because later on in your life, when you say that you achieved some status in your soccer team from your high school, other people know what you're talking about, because there is like this idea of the field of soccer itself, which is umbrellaed under what general field? Athletics or sports? Yeah, athletics or sports in general. Right? So we also think analogously. So if you achieve status in the world of theater, and then you're talking to someone who knows nothing of theater, but they're really big into sports, they have some kind of an analogy, because they're like, oh, that's kind of like if you were a star quarterback. See what I'm saying? So we relate to one another and our symbolic status of whether it's good or bad, whether there's honor or dishonor, via analogy. Right? So we've all been through a schooling system of some sort. Oh, you were doing really, really, really great. You were doing so good at school. Okay. Well, I don't know what your school was like, but I can analogously imagine what that means. And maybe I thought doing well at school is kind of cringe. It's actually kind of try hard. What are you, teacher's pet? Right? Like that idea is an idea that people have. And then if you tried to earn good grades, you probably dealt with the fact that there were people who looked down on you for trying. And if you got good grades, but you didn't really try, then you probably were quick to tell people, oh, it comes easy. All of these things are important for socioanalysis. All of this. So socioanalysis is kind of like psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis looks at the individual in a clinic and gets you to talk on a couch and free associate about your problems and the things that you don't want to talk about in public. And you work it out with an analyst who is supposed to help you talk about those things so that you can come into a freer relation with yourself, right? And in the process of doing so, you learn things about desire and drive and the things that you repress because you can't think about them without it becoming too difficult to exist, right? You're supposed to come into a freer relationship with those things. If you want to hear me talk for a half hour explaining why psychoanalysis is pretty cool, even though it's kind of crazy and I have disagreements with it, you can always check out the lecture I did for Social 101 yesterday. But today I kind of want to get on with it. I want to move on. I'm going to say something about Chicago in a minute. And then I'm going to tie it into the interesting question about the revolutionary subject and how that infiltrated social theory. Because there is this idea that because you are a white male or a white woman, you shouldn't speak in certain situations. Okay? Well, on the opposite side, people will say because you're a black woman or because you're a trans woman, you should speak in certain situations, right? That idea is one that drives some people crazy. Other people, it doesn't bother you at all because you go, well, so-and-so had their turn. Now it's these other people's turn, right? There is that kind of thinking. Sociology and social theory itself. Hey guys, with the yawning, you guys gotta like, you're gonna do it. It's called cover your mouth because it's actually rude in every society where there are people who are civilized to not cover it. Partially because it also makes me want to yawn, and then I'll get tired and I'll lose my role. I'll lose my thunder. So but by the way, I just spent the last hour and a half yawning. And I was like, I wanted to take a nap before I did this because I was like, I ate lunch and it was fantastic. But then I was like, it's hot out. The sun is nice. And I was just like, I just want to take a nap right now. So anyway, I get it. It's not personal unless it is, in which case, oh, well. But yeah, so we're talking about symbolic status and how symbolic status, anywhere that it exists, there is a field. Because anywhere that there's symbolic status, other people will want some of that. Right? It's like, I want to be the man. I want to be the man. Even a woman might say, I want to be the man. Right? I want to be the CEO, girl boss. But I want people to look at me and realize I'm the man. Now, I'm using the man in like this sort of old-fashioned way where it's like, I'm the king of the world. I'm the emperor. It's very like what Elon Musk is trying to put out, right? It's what he's trying to put out. He's like, I'm the man. I'm a genius, but I'm also like involved with politics and I'm doing all of these things. And it's like, he is gaming people's attention in part. I mean, he does other things, but he is also gaming people's attention for a sort of symbolic status. That's undeniable. But so is Trump. He's the president. But also, you could probably say anybody who's a politician is having to game attention for symbolic capital, but there's different ways of doing it. There's a way of doing it that's humble and measured, mild and measured, right? It's more humble. And there's another way that's, loud and braggadocious. It's like, oh, I'm awesome. I'm so cool. And the other way is like, it would never say I'm cool. It would just be like, I am. But I wouldn't say it. You'll just kind of, realize I am. Which is like, I mean, as the opposite of Trump, I guess, Biden calling people Jack, okay, Jack. He's trying to be cool grandpa, all right? Or maybe uncle when he was younger. Coolness is kind of like a cheap version of nobility. Coolness comes around with the student movements, really, that kicked off in the 1960s. I mean, before that, it was the beatniks, right? It was the beatniks. And it was also everywhere underground music ever came into existence, but especially in the blues and jazz and folk. We have people trying to live and be themselves in a raw, authentic way. And they're trying to live outside of other people's boxes. And in doing so, they kind of take up like this cool, indifferent approach. It's not indifferent like it doesn't care about anything, but it definitely doesn't care about the social order's expectations, right? It's definitely not trying too hard. Well, status works different in the underground than it does in the above ground. The above ground you should think of as institutions or the institutional matrix. And when I say institutional matrix, I mean they're all in relation to each other. The schooling system props up the prison system, which props up the schooling system, right? Like they both hold each other together in society, right? And of course, all the other institutions hold up those institutions. So that's the matrix of institutions. And a lot of people can go their entire lives only living inside of institutions, never really having a life outside of the expectations of the institutions, right? Well, in the 1960s, student radicals were all really big fans of Bob Dylan. They were fans of lots of other people as well, like Timothy Leary or I don't know. I'm forgetting the name of the guy who wrote the poem that is called Howl. But does anyone know off the top of their head? Are you looking it up, David? Yeah. Well, he was a friend of Jack Kerouac, right? So you had the Jack Kerouac and oh man, the name is totally escaping me right now. But he wrote the poem Howl. Yes, Allen Ginsberg. Thank you. So Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac, they were part of the beatnik movement, which was a precursor to the hippies. And the hippies were a precursor to the punks. And the punks were precursors to a lot of other sort of splinter offs, like goths and emos and hardcore kids. And all of those were alternative, as was hip hop, right? These are alternative sort of subcultures, and they were called subculture because they're not mainstream culture. Now, eventually, everything kind of became mainstream through the internet, and now normies are more edgy than alternative kids. You know, so it's really hard. It's really hard to use these old categories, isn't it? We live in a different world now. But this coolness that doesn't take too seriously the symbolic order or its mandates, the laws or the norms, that transgresses the laws and the norms. That coolness is not just being above the law, it's also being indifferent to how other people see you. It's the ability to wear something that other people think is cringe and saying, actually, it's space though. This is actually really cool. But you don't say it. You just imply it by being cool, by being comfortable in your own skin and exuding an aura of confidence and charisma. When you do that, you can get away with anything, almost. That's what the counterculture taught us. But I said that it's a cheap version of nobility. So when you think of nobility, what are you thinking of? Should be thinking of kings and queens and princes and princesses and lords and ladies and people who have very elaborate table manners and lots of money. If you want an example of this, go watch a few episodes of Downton Abbey. Would be a good example of some nobility. They're an aristocratic family, and their whole life revolves around maintaining an estate. And that's an estate that became theirs because the father of the house's father's father fought in a war, and the king said, okay, you get to have this estate because you did a good job. And if you watch shows like, I don't know, Game of Thrones, you'll see, someone does a good job, and then you'll see the king or the queen or whatever be like, you get to take over this castle. It's yours now. That's what we're talking about. And then all the people that live in that area paying you for protection with taxes, they fund your staff of servants. But it's not just servants. Imagine that you live in a castle and all of your friends get to live there too. They never live alone in the castle. They always get to move all their homies in as well. So it's pretty good. It's pretty good. If you can learn how to get in with the king and get hooked up with an estate, well, then you don't really have to do very much. I mean, you have to rule And then you have to like listen to your wise philosophy professor's opinions, and then you apply those when you're ruling the local townsfolk, and you got to pull it off in a way that doesn't make them want to rebel and kill you, right? So that's a little complicated. But if you can keep everybody happy, more or less, then for thousands of years, the way to be a successful human was to be a noble, which is to say everybody else pays you taxes or works for you, right? Well, we live in a different kind of age now. We killed those people. It started with, like the French Revolution and the American Revolution, right? We said, no, we're not going to play that game anymore. No, we're going to say that the business people and the working people, they make the world go round. The world is theirs. The world is ours. We're working people. It's our world. We don't take our orders from no king. Absolutely not. We'll set up democratic republics and parliaments, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do like adults sitting at the table having a adult conversation, right? That was the idea. So when we're thinking about sociological communication and what it means to be a human being today, it's kind of interesting because our entire lives have been shaped by what it means to be cool, or what it means to be based or cringe, or what it means, and no one thinks in these terms, but what it means to be noble. And all the games we play that seek status, achievement, rank, good grades, being the best on your team at some specific task, or being really good at theater or whatever. Being cool versus being excellent are in constant tension and are both just two sides of this older idea of nobility. And what Pierre Bourdieu is going to say is that anywhere that there is symbolic capital to be won, you cannot act like it's all you care about. Even though it might feel like a game of life and death. Like the stakes are so huge if you take the field seriously. Everything hinges on it for you. You're invested in it. You can't act like it's everything, though. You actually kind of have to be above it. Or maybe not. Maybe you can take the symbolic capital seriously. You don't call it symbolic capital, but you say, I'm going to be president someday. I want to be rich and famous someday, right? Well, some people will go, well, that's crazy. You're really full of yourself. You have delusions of grandeur. And so it can undermine your success to say these things out loud. But if you are in the right kind of situation where you can say those things, the real point is, if you're doing this, you shouldn't be doing it for money, right? Nobility is doing things for reasons other than money. And so the symbolic capital that you seek, the status that you want to achieve, the success of your ability to achieve that status in part depends on you saying it's not about the money. So working class people and businessmen are an exception. They're an exception. But if you're a doctor or a lawyer or a nurse or a teacher or a professor, to put it a different way, if you are a professional, your occupation is supposed to be a calling, and it's not about the money. Yeah, it's good. Of course, you want to be able to support your loved ones, but that's not the point. The point is that you're following your passion and that you seek to fulfill this calling, right? To say that you want to be a doctor because you feel called to be a doctor is to be like, I've always wanted to help people. I've always wanted to help people. And whenever I actually try to help people, they thank me for it and said, wow, thank you so much. You should do this. I feel called to do this. That's why I do it. Professions get their legitimation, their legitimacy from this idea that it's a genuine calling and not just a job. So if you're in college for the right reason, it's not just for the job coupon. It's not just so that you'll make a little bit more per year. No, it's because you have a calling. And even if that's not true, and let's be honest, a lot of you are working class kids, right? Right? A lot of you are working class kids. And if you're a working class kid, you are just probably trying to survive, right? Yeah, but if you're a working class kid trying to survive, and now you're at the university, you're supposed to be learning how to be a professional. And so what I'm telling you is professionals have to find a calling. Now, you might just be happy to make enough money that you can support your family. But you'll notice that when you're around other people who are professionals, they talk a lot about how they were going to do this and then they were going to do that, but they just didn't feel it. And now they're doing this thing that they really feel called to do. That's like a flex. And it's a flex that says, I'm not in this for economic capital. And that's where Pierre Bourdieu comes along and says, they're doing it for symbolic capital, which is to say prestige, honor, respect. He basically says that to succeed, you actually have to deny that there is prestige in it. You have to be like, oh yeah, but I feel called to do this. And then someone says, oh, well, a lot of people love you for doing it. You go, oh, a lot of people hate me for doing it. Think about cops. Think about teachers. If you're a cop, you can bet that there's a lot of people on the left who don't like you. If you're a teacher, you can bet there's a lot of people on the right who don't like you. It's just the way that the culture war currently plays out. It's kind of silly. It's not accurate. That's not how most people on the left or right actually are. But it's the way that the culture war plays out, especially online or on Fox News or on MSNBC. It's supposed to require sacrifice to pursue your calling. It can't be easy. And we're not just talking about the sacrifice of, oh, I had to deal with sitting in a bunch of cubicles for a long time, taking tests and trying to satisfy authority figures. No, being good at school is not all it takes. No, you should actually be able to, if you really mean that this is your calling, you should be able to stand on business to the extent that it actually upsets people. It actually might let your parents down to go be this instead of that. That's one of the scariest things for students going through the university system. Your parents have a lot of high expectations for you and are probably helping pay for it. And then here you are being like, I want to make them happy, but I also feel torn because I also feel like I have to live up to this other thing, this higher self that I have. It's complicated. It's complicated for each and every one of you. And the grades have very little to do with any of that. Nevertheless, we're in the schooling system and we have grades, right? And so, yeah, I'm going to keep grading you all. But at the same time, I try to not make that be the main thing. I try to make the main thing be a certain cluster of concepts. And the concepts that I really wanted to focus on in the final weeks here, especially as you all start to think about what your final project might be. Is it going to be a little paper? Is it going to be a little podcast? Is it going to be a little oral presentation? I want you to be thinking about the fields that you have navigated versus the field that you are currently navigating, and then the fields that you aim to eventually inhabit. And then think about how the fields that you have navigated in the past are how you developed the habitus that you have now. That might mean, so let's get a working definition of habitus. Because you can't think field without thinking habitus. So if you're a really good sport ball player or theater kid, I don't know, whatever it is that you are, whatever it is that you're doing, if you're really good at it, it's because you've developed the habitus of one who is really good at it. Every field has rules of thumb. And then they also have actual rules, like on the books kind of rules. There's a certain kind of lifestyle you have to live to succeed in any field that you are in. So think about it. If you're in high school, but you don't know how to show up to the high school for class, you're not going to be in the high school anymore. It's just bye-bye. So there are certain things that everyone at that institution is doing, and they're all doing the same thing. Some people might be early, some people are just on time, and some people are late, and some people miss certain days, right? Maybe I miss a few random days in the year. Okay. But you know how to get there most of the time. There are people who don't know how to get there. They don't know how to show up at all, right? You take a person out of a completely different set of conditions, like an Aborigine from Australia. You just pick up an Aborigine and drop them into your hometown. You think they're going to know how to get to class? You could teach them English. Maybe they already know English. It doesn't matter. That's not enough to become the kind of creature with the kind of habitus to be able to be a high school student. And then we can talk about the habitus of the kind of high school student who's really good at high school. And maybe you're really good at the social scene at the high school, but you're not really good at the academics. Or maybe you're really good at the academics, but you're not really good at the social scene. Or maybe you're really good at the sports, but you're not really good at the arts. There's all these different ways that it breaks down. And some people just aren't really good at any of it. And they become punks who just say, oh, I'm against it. I'm against all that. And it's very convenient for them. But of course, there's also punks who are good at these things. So you can't have punks that are good. And you can have punks who are good at these things, and then they choose to not do very well because they're kind of like invested in the identity of the rebel. So they actually undermine themselves on purpose so as to maintain their status as a rebel. But then again, maybe they're just getting back at their mom or their dad. Or maybe it's because a teacher in the first year was really rude to them and it ruined their life. And now they'll never, ever take school seriously again. So there's all kinds of ways that these things play out at the psychological level. And we can psychoanalyze that at the individual level. And that's interesting. And everybody through therapy gets a little bit of secondhand psychoanalysis. Everybody through the internet, if you like get into therapy culture at all, you get a little bit of secondhand psychoanalysis. But what you never get is secondhand socioanalysis or like legit socioanalysis. Socioanalysis looks at the fields that you've inhabited and the fields that you've navigated and the kinds of habitus that you acquired navigating those fields. So the other thing I have to say about habitus is that it also includes your personality traits. It includes your quirks. It includes your deep-seated beliefs. It includes your way of talking. It really goes deep. It really includes a lot of stuff. Now, when we talk about field and habitus, if I had the whiteboard, I'd love to show you this. But when we talk about field and habitus, on the one side you put field, on the other side you put habitus, okay? So just imagine it on the whiteboard there. Field, habitus, okay? On the side of field, you should write positions. And on the side of habitus, you should write dispositions. Every one of you has a disposition, a fundamental disposition. And a lot of people, they think about your personality. Well, your personality is downstream from your disposition. You have a fundamental disposition. Now, your disposition is something that you have to be a realist about your disposition when you are navigating a field. Because if a field that you're navigating, if it has a lot of positions, and those positions aren't very easy to achieve or maintain, given your disposition, then you're not going to be very happy. But there will be people with the perfect disposition to succeed in school, right? That's where it really does come easy for them. And I'm not just talking about nerds, because we might be talking about somebody who's like getting B's in all the classes, but is very popular. So that person has a really good habitus based on their disposition. And that habitus and disposition, it helps them navigate the field of the high school. But you know what? Sometimes the habitus that you develop that helps you succeed in high school doesn't help you anywhere else in life. Sometimes being really good at high school means you're not going to be very good at anything else. I believe you've seen Napoleon Dynamite. I think that's like half of you, which is pretty good. How many of you remember Uncle Rico? Yeah, Lauren, you remember Uncle Rico. Isn't he the one who's like trying to throw the football? He's always throwing the football on camera. So he's living alone. He's in his 40s. He has his little travel trailer that he lives in. And he sets up a camera on a tripod and he records himself throwing the football and then like chasing after it and then trying to catch it. And then he's always talking about how he was really, really good in high school. And then he'll be like sitting there talking to Napoleon. He'll be like, oh yeah, those are the days. And he's like, oh yeah, I could throw this thing. So anyway, actually he's talking to the brother. He's talking to Napoleon's brother. And he's like, oh yeah, I'm really good. He's like, I could throw this over that mountain over there. He's like, oh yeah, I could have thrown this over that mountain. And then Napoleon comes riding up on his bicycle. And the uncle's like, yo, watch this. And then he throws it and he hits Napoleon. And he knocks Napoleon off of his bicycle. And Napoleon's like, what? And then like, it's a thing. Anyway, great movie. It's an Idaho classic because it came from Southern Idaho. So, it's about Idaho. It's about small town life in Idaho and how everybody in small town Idaho is really boring. It's kind of like a self-own, like the whole thing is just like some people making fun of themselves in a small town in Idaho. So it's definitely worth watching, especially if you're like a SoCal girl here, right? If you're like from out of state, well, then definitely check it out, right? Watch Napoleon Dynamite because it's what people think of Idaho for the most part, especially since they're not up here. North Idaho is beautiful. Well, that's where I'm at right now. It's beautiful. It's like miniature Alaska. But Southern Idaho, there's parts of that where it's just like a desolate wasteland. And the towns are really sad places to be. And so everyone's like, oh, gosh. And that's the Napoleon impersonation that I'll give you. All right. Or Napoleon Dynamite. Anyway. So, yeah, I come from small town, nowhere, Idaho. What's my socioanalysis of myself, right? Well, if I was writing a paper for this class and I wanted to do some socioanalysis and relate it to my book and the other concepts in this class, here's how I would do it. This is what you might want to pay attention here because this could make your final project easy, right? So I come out of a family and the family has a field, which means that there's status to be won or lost, which means that there's going to be the prized child. And some child is going to be don't be like him, right? If you have a whole bunch of kids, the more kids you have, the more likely this is going to become a big problem. And I come from a really big family. I'm one of 10 children. And I am one of 10 children, the one who was the most problematic. Okay. So if you think I'm bad, just imagine how bad I used to be and, feel bad for my parents because I was a problem child. I did not take just because as a reason. And so I always ask why do we do this? Why do we do that? Why do you want me to do this? Why do you want me to do that? And my mom, bless her heart, she did not like that very much. And she kind of considered it to be rebellion. And I didn't feel like a rebel. I just wanted to understand why we did things. But from her standpoint, you do it because I said so. And so I quickly became the problem child, which back in the day meant a lot of spankings. And so some people would call that a lot of child abuse, right? Well, look, I love my mom. I would do things differently. She would probably do things differently, but it was what it was. And so I grew up in this field of the family being the black sheep. But I lived in California when I was a kid, and there was also the field of the neighborhood, right? There were the kids that I liked, and then there were the bullies. The bullies would chase us on bikes and try to fight us. And then there was us. And we like to do things like build forts and go break bottles and things like that. We're just little hooligans. But when I was like 7 years old, my parents moved to North Idaho to get away from all that and to try to raise their kids right. And they were doing the best they could on not very much money at all. All they had was labor time. They had no money, just labor time. So they moved to a cheap piece of land and started a little homestead, right? They started a homestead. Now, you guys might know a little bit about homesteading, but it means you start basically on a bare patch of ground and then you make a life off of that. It's not like you buy a house from a bank over time through a mortgage so you can live in the suburbs. My mom's like a pioneer woman. She really wanted to live deliberately and not in a passive consumer kind of way. And that's something that I still really admire in her. And every woman I've ever met who knows my mom, every single woman I've ever met who knows my mom tells me, your mom, oh, she's so amazing. Or they'll go, she's an icon. She's an icon. And it's true. She's like the shortest woman you'll ever meet. And she's so powerful. Okay. That's my mom. And my dad loves her to death because he knows he's got something special. Yeah, well, when she got into religion, she got into it like hardcore, and she was like family planning, and God chooses how many kids we have. And that's why she had 10. Not because my dad was like, that's exactly what I want, but because my mom was like, that's what's right. And my dad was like, yes, honey. And then he just worked as hard as he could to try to make it work, right? So psychoanalysis would look at my relationship with my parents probably and think about my traumas and try to deduce how I am today and the problems that I have off of that. What it wouldn't do, though, is the bigger socioanalytic move, which is to think about the fields and how those developed in me a certain kind of habitus that either helped or hindered me from succeeding in other fields that I tried to navigate. So what were the other fields I tried to navigate? There was the church. And I did not navigate that one very well at all. I already had a chip on my shoulder with authoritarianism because I didn't like being told you should do this just because. I wanted to know why. And at that church, there was no why. Everything was just because God said so. God said so. And here's what God said. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, you're just a man. And I'm supposed to trust your interpretation of the Bible. And I'm just like a little 10-year-old. But I was literally thinking this. I'm just like, I'm supposed to trust you? You're just a guy. Like, how do I know the Spirit of God is inside of you helping you interpret Scripture? Right? So it didn't go very well in the church. That doesn't mean that I today have a problem with churches, but it does mean that I have a problem with certain kinds of churches. It didn't work out for me. Right? So there was status to be won and status to be lost in that church. And I lost status every time I went in that building. I had a very formative experience that psychoanalysts and socioanalysts would get a lot of mileage from. At the age of 12, I was sitting at the Sunday school table, and we were mixed ages. So there was like little kids and older kids. I think there was probably like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds, maybe some 13-year-olds at this table. Maybe there were even older teenagers. I don't know. And I was really into it, actually. This was the only part of church that during that year I was actually enjoying, because what we were doing was reading from a book. And it was mostly the guy who was leading the group who would read the book. And it was like a storybook. And so it was a lot less boring than other things. I was like into it because we just read like a chapter every week, right? I was not prepared for what was about to happen. He said, this time we're going to all take turns reading. Instantly, I was like, oh no, I don't know how to read. I was a 12-year-old boy who did not know how to read. And I was so embarrassed. Now, my parents had tried really hard to teach me how to read. My grandma had also tried to teach me how to read. No one could teach me. I was unteachable. It just was not coming naturally. Okay. So eventually the turn comes around for me. It's my turn to read. And I kind of just said I couldn't. I said I can't. First, I tried to pass it off. I was like, oh, I don't want to. And Mr. Johnson, he said, you have to. And I said, I can't. And now he thought I was being a rebel. You see, because I'd already lost so much status at this institution, people already thought of me as like this little rebel kid who's just, going to challenge authority. So he didn't believe me. And he said, you're going to read it. Don't talk back. And I said, I don't know how. Now my ears are burning red. I'm so embarrassed. And all these other kids are kind of laughing because they think it's a joke, or maybe they think it's funny that maybe they didn't like me. And they're like, hey, he's stupid. He can't even read. Who knows? I'll never know because I was too embarrassed. And so Mr. Johnson, I'm not protecting his name. That was his real name. He gets up and he walks around and he grabs me by my ear and he pulls me out of my chair by my ear and drags me out of the room to take me up the stairs to interrupt my parents' Bible study so that he can like rat me out, get me in trouble. And halfway up the stairs, I tore my ear out of his hand and I ran up the stairs and I ran outside and I went and I cried a lot. I was so humiliated. Okay. It was really, really bad. And, I skipped the service the pastor gave. I skipped the whole thing. I was too humiliated. And so when I finally came back, my parents were there and they felt bad because they knew it was real. And so they had Mr. Johnson with them and they had him apologize to me. And he said that he was sorry. I never talked to him again. I also never looked at him again because he didn't really seem sorry. Okay. He just was a jerk. I didn't like him. So in the last 4 minutes that remain, I want to zoom back out and say, yeah, so I was in the field of the family. I was in the field of the neighborhood. I was in the field of the church. I was never in the field of the high school because I was being homeschooled, which is also probably part of the reason that I couldn't read at the age of 12, because my mom might be as exceptionally gifted at a lot of things, but teaching people stuff was not one of them. And I wanted to go to high school so bad. But my parents at the time, I think they thought that that was just more rebellion. And they thought it was just me wanting to go kind of break off from the family. And they didn't like that. Right. Eventually, I ran away from home and I joined the workforce, and there were a bunch of other fields that I navigated. And then one thing led to another. And then I went to college at some point, even though I grew up in a family and a church where nobody went to college. I was the first person I ever knew to go to college. And I got into it. I found out I had a sort of natural talent for it. But I never read serious nonfiction before the age of 22. Okay. So 22 is when I started reading serious nonfiction. And I liked it. But I definitely didn't have any sort of feeling or calling for that before that. So it's easy if you're going to psychoanalyze or socioanalyze me to think about the formative experience of how embarrassing that was. And now I love books, right? So maybe there's something going on there. Also, I love teaching and I love homeschool moms And I love teachers, and I want them to not have their spark of curiosity and intellect and curiosity snuffed out by an institution that turns everything into a performance for grades, for a career, when in reality, we all have talent, we all have a calling, and that's being suffocated in our parents. That's being suffocated in these teachers. It's being suffocated because they're being overworked and underpaid, and they don't have time energy. And when they don't have time energy, large energy infused, repeatable blocks of time for their loved ones, they're not going to be able to be lifelong learners, and they're not going to be able to develop real relationships with their children or their students. And so I'll close off by addressing the question that came up before we started recording from Gabriella about Chicago. It's a big deal. I went from not being able to read at the age of 12, not reading any serious nonfiction before the age that you all are, either now or close to now at the age of 37, going to the Platypus Affiliated Society convention in Chicago. I had an audience of 100 people who are there because they want to be. And it's a field that is supercharged with so much status to be won or lost that one of the other presenters on the panel that I was on had his hands shaking like this the whole time. And we were on that panel with Bill Ayers, the father of the New Left in a sort of sense, along with a few other people. But he was one of the primary writers of the Weather Underground Manifesto. Bernadine Dorn was right there in front of me while I was giving this talk. That's like, in this kind of world, in this field, that's like I'm an actor who has to act in front of Tom Hanks, or I'm a comedian who has to make jokes in front of, I don't know, famous comedian or something. You know what I mean? Like, it's the pressure was on. Bernadine Dorn is the one who led the student walkout in 1969 that split the Students for a Democratic Society. It split it. 300 people walked out after her. It split the organization. The student radical movement was never the same. And then she was the #1 most wanted on the FBI list, the FBI most wanted list. She was the #1 for 7 years. She had to basically exist underground, literally, through a sort of underground, basically like an underground railroad system of activists who were protecting her from the FBI. And of course, it's because they were setting bombs at the Pentagon and the US State Department and all this other stuff. They were crazy. They were crazy people doing crazy things. Long story short, I was able to wow that audience, and I was able to make a theoretical point that is a serious problem for most of those people, because it's a serious problem for the old and the new left. And I was able to do it in a way that made them like me, I think. Like, they laughed a lot and seemed to enjoy my company and came and hung out with me afterwards at the bar. Okay? So I don't know. I kind of think that that's a good basis upon which to start thinking about socioanalyzing my life from where I was to where I am now. But where do I want to be? That's the kind of thing that I'd be writing about if I was preparing to write a final in this class. Thank you.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Theory Underground exists to cultivate the conditions necessary for a working-class intellectual renaissance that goes beyond old political categories or other identitarian niches. At TU, autodidact workers with earbuds and professionals who see no future in existing institutions or movements are able to challenge their doxa and develop an understanding of the situation we are in.
If you subscribe at theoryunderground.com, you'll get access to a package of courses, including my Intro to Fault Line Theory, which includes Intro to Nick Land and Intro to Slavoj Žižek. These courses are being woven with the 3 courses that take place on a month-to-month basis, spread out throughout the year of 2025. Those courses are 12 Core Concepts and the Fundamental Problems with the Situation Today with social theorist David McKerracher, 12 Essential Political Thinkers with political theorist Benjamin Studebaker, and The Philosophy of Nature with philosopher Nina Power.
The way these all get woven together at a deeper and more meta level is through the ongoing research seminars led by David McKerracher, Benjamin Studebaker, and Michael Downs, where they engage with one another's work by sharing developments from their own perspectives, theory, and research.
If you subscribe at higher levels and support our work, we'll support your development with bespoke teaching. Alone and unaided, we struggle to grasp our situation in its fullness and formulate a meaningful response. By working together and pooling our energies, we can do better. Join us at theoryunderground.com/subscribe.
There'll be two kinds of people in 10 years. Those who said, I knew all along Theory Underground was going to make this huge difference. Those are the people that are like Nance, who were on the sidelines at one point and then said, nah, I'm going to get in. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to go hard. And then there's another kind of person, a person who waits in the wings, collects receipts, and who will say in 10 years, oh yeah, I was there. I saw that happen. And then they'll gossip monger. Listen, if you want to get involved, get involved. But if you're going to sit there in the bleachers, well, here's some popcorn. I hope you have fun.